Rise up!
This is the Rise Up See Red podcast, all about the Arizona Cardinals and the NFL, featuring insider and outsider perspectives. Enjoy the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Now here are your hosts, Jess Root and Seth Cox.
Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans, and welcome to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. I'm your host, Jess Root from CardsWire.com, the USA Today NFL wire site that covers, of course, your Arizona Cardinals. With me on the line, with is my co-host, Seth Cox from RevengeOfTheBirds.com, the SB Nation Arizona Cardinals site, and this is episode 537. It's our yearly mock draft of the first round, which we've been doing for, my goodness, I think 2015 would have been the first year we did it, so this would be the 10th time we've done it, Seth. Can you believe we've done 10 years of mock drafts? Some to some success and others that were just, gross, like most mock drafts end up being, because as, the truth is, we just don't have all the information.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is like the way we developed our understanding of how Steve Keim and the Arizona Cardinals worked. We're trying to develop that with Monty Ossenfort and Jonathan Gannon and company. But the reality is that this is the most change the NFL has seen. I mean, think about the teams just picking in the first 8 picks, right? The Commanders have a completely new regime. The Pats, for the first time in 20 some odd years, a new regime. The Cardinals' second year. The Chargers, a completely new regime. The Giants, probably the last year of this regime if they don't get it right. The Titans, a brand new regime. The Falcons, a brand new regime. Like, how do you predict what new people are going to do that you have no idea what's going on? I mean, we've even seen crazy stuff, just like people mocking the Falcons taking a quarterback 8th overall. Because
that would be stupid. Come on, they just spent $1 gazillion on Kirk Cousins,
right? But but that's what I'm saying is, like, I think this year more than anything else, because of the changes in terms of who the people that are making the selections, that we're seeing this become a giant puzzle that is not like the puzzles that you and I are used to piecing together here. I mean, and I think it's just because there's so much uncertainty at the top that you don't have a feeling for where guys are going to go at the bottom, because you just truthfully don't know when people are going to go. I mean, we're even talking about like the Seattle Seahawks. I mean, what does Mike McDonald want for his new team, right?
Right. Quarterback would make sense this year, and Michael Penix makes sense because of their offensive coordinator who coached Penix at Washington. But at the same time, don't they want to build that defense a little bit? That would also make sense. Like, yeah, it's interesting how it's going to go. We both have a few trades, and I ultimately think, like, because chaos starts. So I think what normally happens in the draft is that there aren't that many teams that have trade plans, but then something happens and that changes things. And I will, like, we could predict how many trades there's going to be, and I think that would be kind of bonkers. What is it? You have 2 trades happening, and I also have 2 trades happening.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I think this is so unpredictable that, like, again, we know this is probably the craziest thing that I've heard, is that you have teams, obviously the Pats, the Cardinals, the Chargers, that all could trade down. But then you have the Vikings, the Broncos, and the Raiders, as well as the Cardinals later on, that could all trade up or trade down again. So it's like, okay, then who are the dance partners that are moving up? And so that's what's so interesting about all of this, is that you have all all of these things in play at once, and we really just have no idea what's happening. And so it's just going to be like, hey, let's throw some darts. You and I feel fairly confident about the first 4 picks.
Yes.
And then after that, it's basically a lot of similarities, but a lot of different names and chaos.
Yes. I will say that I used this same mock draft for what I wrote for Sportsbook Wire, which takes a more of a betting lens to it. And I will say that a lot of my picks are chalk in terms of favorites. Most of them are. And I think that's, generally speaking, unless one domino thing, I think my top 10, I would be shocked if, like, I think legitimately of my top 10 that 6 will be, or 6 or 7 will be, like, right on. I'm guessing. I'm thinking that based on that I will have now. I think that probably 6 or 7 will be, and if it doesn't, then it's chaos. Which,
yeah.
I'm prepared for chaos. But and what I went into this mock draft doing is, we know, like, the Cardinals have been rumored for trades. I'm 98% certain they're not going to come off number 4, but I do believe that they have their eye on trading up. We heard, like, I saw on ESPN, like, trading up for cornerback. I think they're going to try, depending on how the board falls, how the picks go. And I think there's one linchpin pick. If one pick happens, that will be kind of I think that will be the catalyst for the Cardinals being aggressive to move up. So let's go ahead and get started with the top 10. We'll break this down by 10s. We'll go the top 10, then 11 through 20, and then the last 12 picks. Let's start at the top. I don't think we need to spend a lot of time with this because it's been telegraphed. I mean, number 1 overall, it would be the biggest upset in NFL history if the Bears go any other direction than Caleb Williams. Like, we're talking, the odds are minus 10,000 him to be the pick. It's basically a certainty. Caleb Williams is going first overall. He only met with the Bears. They traded away Justin Fields, and it's the only thing that makes sense at this point. Because really, I mean, some might say that Jaden Daniels is the better prospect based on last season. But if you look at the college career of both players, I don't think, like, you can't be blinded by the one season when Daniels had all the talent and Williams' USC team was lacking in talent on offense and on, they didn't protect him. They had a terrible defense. And so, like, you look at their body of work over their careers, and you're saying Caleb Williams is closer to the real deal than any other quarterback in this class.
Yeah, and with Williams, you get a guy that's extremely talented, has a lot of Kyler Murray to his game. Not as explosive as a runner, but a good runner, good arm talent. My biggest issue with Williams has always been that he does everything from, or his best plays or his strongest plays always come from ad-libbing and things like that. And so we'll see how that translates to the next level. But like you said, I don't think there's a lot to talk about here. This feels like a done
deal. Caleb Williams is going first overall. He might as well already have the contract signed. Number 2 overall, we're both going with chalk, with Jaden Daniels going number 2 to the Washington Commanders, despite little buzz that the Commanders might take J.J. McCarthy, might take Drake May. It really, really feels like it's Jaden Daniels. And for the guy that they hired as their offensive coordinator in Cliff Kingsbury, let's be honest, Jaden Daniels is the one that makes the most sense, right? And you look at his ability, like, you worry about we've talked about the build, it really feels like literally this is 13 years later, RG3 again, right? The same type of player, the same team, and the same reckless abandon.
Yeah, and I think with the new regime in there, Cliff does like to run the ball quite a bit. I think you've got a good group there. I've said it before. I'm not overall sold that Daniel should be the second overall pick, but it's not my pick to make. That's a different question,
right? This is what do we think is going to happen,
right? It's not my pick to make, and I think that's where things are leaning right now, and that takes us to the Patriots. And again, like, what happens is going to be interesting, but I think we need to mention right now is as literally as you and I were getting on the air, we're just kind of chit-chatting, and Dane Brugler drops a interesting nugget from about 45 minutes ago. and it didn't change. Jess and I didn't take the bait or anything like that. But Brugler replied to Josh Norris, so two, intelligent draft guys, plenty of buzz for JJ at 3. That'll throw a wrench in almost every mock.
The chaos would ensue, because if Drake May drops to 4, then things get crazy, and then I think that's where things affect the Cardinals. But if May goes 3rd, I think everything's fine.
Yeah, so you and I have May going 3rd. We didn't hedge ourselves; we just left it. But
I still think it's a lot of smokescreen, and I think there, as much as we're saying is being said about J.J. McCarthy, let's not forget everything that we read and hear about him is about things other than his quarterbacking ability, the physical tools that we have. Not that he's lacking in physical tools, but it's just that everything that we hear about him are the intangibles, and the intangibles matter in the NFL. But when you're drafting someone in top 3, you have to have the intangibles plus the physical traits. And so ultimately, I think that will prevail for me. I think ultimately that will prevail.
Yeah, and I'm with you. I think May goes 3rd. It's going to be really interesting to see what happens if like you said, if McCarthy goes 3, how do things heat up?
And how do crazy, but like if Patriots draft J.J. McCarthy 3rd overall, like, what are you doing? You just got rid of Mac Jones. Why are you drafting Mac Jones?
The interesting thing is that now it's come out, and again, this could just be smoke as we hear all the time, but that the Giants wouldn't go up for J.J. McCarthy. Does that change for Drake May, though, right? Or let's get even wilder. Would that change for Jaden Daniels if May goes 2 and McCarthy goes 3? So does that, if the Giants are saying, no.
I find that funny. I do find that funny. They wouldn't draft McCarthy 4, but they would at 6.
Right. So, well, basically what they're saying is it's not worth the 2 extra 2s that they'd have to give.
Right. That does make sense. And that leads us to the Cardinals pick. And as much as we've talked about like the 3 first-round picks that could come from the Vikings, the honest truth is, the Vikings moving up to 4 doesn't make sense if McCarthy's their target. Because if you're targeting McCarthy, unless the Chargers have said no, but the buzz is that the Chargers are looking to move off of number 5, is that the Vikings they don't need to go all the way up to number 4. They just need to get past the team they think that's going to take McCarthy, which might be the Giants. And the only reason that they would come up to number 4 is if the Cardinals are also, if they're bidding against the Giants moving up or another team. That's the only reason they would need to come up to 4, is if they're bidding against another team, because I don't think otherwise they just let Harrison get picked 4th, and then they get on the phone with the Chargers, who would love to move back. From everything I have, like all the buzz that's out there, is that the Chargers would love to move off of number 5.
Yeah, and the thing that I've heard about that, and I agree with you 100%. That's the noise that's out there. The thing that I've heard about that is that, you know, Harbaugh wants to rebuild this team in his own image and what the image he thinks. And, you know, obviously I think we all kind of know what that image is. But so if you end up getting 11, 23, and then a first or second next year, whatever and I think you said, you know, in this instance, you had them going, what, 11? So they would go 11 and next year's 1, or what?
Yeah, it's 11, a fourth, and then next year's 1. So and Harbaugh's like, I want next year's 1. And
right.
The Minnesota doesn't want to come off of. And we did just sort of glaze over the fact that the Cardinals took Harrison. I think we don't need to go over too much about that. Harrison is the pick that makes the most sense. He checks literally every box at receiver. He is the best player in the draft who's not a quarterback. There's no one better to bet on. So unless they view, and I talked about this on a radio show, I think it was last week or the week before on AM 1060, is that, you know, the only reason you move off of that is if, say, you have, out of 10, you rank Harrison at 10, you've got Neighbors and Odunze both in the 9 range. So you move off that pick and get a 1 or a 2 for next year, and one of those other 2 guys that you view as nearly on the same level as Harrison, and then you go away feeling pretty all right. But
yeah,
but again, you're just like, but why? Just take Harrison. I think this is we know what Monty did last year. Move down, move up. It was crazy. This year, he's not going to do that yet. I think he's going to do that. He's going to move around on that second pick. So Harrison it is, and then we go, this is where we start differing. So this is where we start moving off the beaten path. I have the Vikings trading up, and from what I have heard from people who have heard, the Vikings don't want to give up number 23, and so they have to find a partner willing to do that. And so they're going to give up 11, one of their day 3 picks, and then next year's first. And that's kind of the linchpin. And the Chargers are like, we wanted to come off that pick anyway, so we'll move back to number 11. The Vikings move up to 5. They get J.J. McCarthy. Should they go up that high to get him? You know, we've talked about McCarthy being kind of like a Brock Purdy. He's an expensive Brock Purdy. But if there is a team that would land a player of his skill and mentality, Minnesota is the perfect place for it because of the talent that they have. If McCarthy went to Denver, that's a mess. If they go to Oakland, maybe a little less a mess. If they go to the Pats, that's a mess. If he goes to the Commanders, that's a mess. Like, if you put Brock Purdy in any of those situations, but you put Brock Purdy on the 49ers, you put Brock Purdy on this year's Minnesota Vikings, you put J.J. McCarthy on those 49ers, you put J.J. McCarthy in that Minnesota Vikings team, you're going to have growing pains, but I think he's the high floor type of guy, like the guy that immediately is going to give you as close to a performance as you got from Kirk Cousins.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that you look at it where you see a guy who ends up, you know, probably being very good, and there are upgrades available, but there's also a lot of downgrades. And so, you know, he ends up being, I don't know, a guy like Kirk Cousins. So, you know, that it is what it is. Like, obviously it's not anything that we have anything to do with, but it's an interesting decision they have to make. I have the Chargers standing pat. They don't get enough. They want 23. They're not going to move down unless they get 23 as well. So they stay and take Joe Alt,
and that causes chaos too, because Alt has been pegged to the Titans everywhere, right? Has been pegged to the Titans everywhere for months.
Right. So that takes us to the Giants, where we both agree again.
Yep,
And
back to chalk. Malik Neighbors.
This is a tough one because you're basically just kind of guessing which wide receiver 2 they prefer, right? Like who's the number 2 receiver. So we're just, like you said, kind of going chalk. We're going with the consensus that Neighbors is wide receiver 2. You give Neighbors to the Giants. I don't think it's a bad pick, and I don't think if you put Rome Odunze there would be a bad pick.
No. There's a lot of signs that say that Odunze is lined up for the Bears. We just saw, I think it was today on social media, where Odunze was working with Caleb Williams, not just visiting the team, but also working out with him and the other Bears receivers. So, this is the barring someone saying, no, we want Rome. This seems like both the Bears picks are, no, I think that they're doing a terrible job of keeping them a secret.
That takes us to the Titans, and we both go same position, different names.
And I go chalk with Alt because, well, he's on the board. He's going to be the first tackle taken. But you have?
Yeah, I have them going with Olu Fashanu. Obviously, without Alt on the board, you have to go somewhere else, and they go with Fashanu, who, checks all the boxes.
Yeah, do you think ultimately he would be number 2 off the board as opposed to Fuaga? I think Fashanu, top to bottom, talent-wise, I think it's kind of like Andrew Thomas a few years ago. Right. Wasn't Andrew Thomas a safer pick because of what he did, and Fashanu is kind of as well?
Well, and here's the thing, and this is what we talked about with Sully the other night, talking about offensive linemen. Go check that one out. That's always the good one. But Fashanu is really the only other left tackle outside of Troy Fatanu, the Washington one, who's 24 and only started for 2 years. So, like, if you're drafting and you need a left tackle, Taisi Fuaga is not an option, never played it. JC Latham never played it. Amarius Mims never played it, right? So those guys have never played left tackle. So if you're like, oh, we're going to just switch, like, so if you love Fuaga, who, and I do, like, I would, before the Jonah Williams thing, and if you were trading back, I would have been 100% okay taking Taisi Fuaga with that 11th pick, but he can't, I shouldn't say he can't. It's just not smart to expect him to be able to play left tackle after never doing it. Olu's done it, been excellent at it. Seems like a no-brainer as O-line 2, but the NFL's fickle, so
yeah, that makes sense. If Alt goes at 5, the Titans have to, like, is there any other direction they could go other than tackle?
I've heard that if Neighbors is on the board, they would take Neighbors. Okay. So that's something just to watch.
Not that that's an option in this one. Oh, right. Something I do want to say, and just as, if we're talking Chargers, I think the Chargers might be, aside from if they stay put and get a tackle or if they trade back, I think there is an outside chance that Harbaugh would be all over Brock Bowers. I wrote who's going to be the team that drafts Brock Bowers. I think the favorite is the Jets, and that makes a lot of sense. But I also, like, if there's a sleeper team that will nab Bowers, either moving up or taking him before you think so, I think that is the Chargers personally. But I don't have that happening, and that's where Titans go tackle. Falcons at number 8. Well, actually, this is where you have your trade happen. Let's hear what is the deal for Minnesota and Atlanta.
Yeah, not to spoil anything, but the irony of it is that we have the same player drafted by the Falcons. But the Vikings come up from 11 to 8, and they are able to move this year's 1 and next year's 2. So again, not having to give up a future 1, not having to give up 23, give up this year's 1, next year's 2 to move up 3 spots. If you go by the trade board, it would be this year's 1 and 3. They don't have a 3, so they give up a little little less than what Jess's scenario is, and they still get JJ McCarthy from the Falcons. So the other thing is, and I know this is cheating, but if the NFL ends up like making them pick swap like the Cardinals did last year, I feel like everybody should get a mulligan if it happens like right before the draft, like the Cardinals did last year.
Yeah.
Right, like we shouldn't be penalized if that pick is wrong at that point.
Right, but ultimately, like when we talk about next week, when we talk about the draft, we will look at. I'll give you some numbers about. Okay, we had X amount of number of players pegged to the pick, and we had X number of players pegged correctly to the team, but not necessarily the same pick. So right now, we both have the Vikings taking McCarthy. We just have a different route for that. And for me, the Falcons are I'm going with this is where the monkey wrench is thrown in. Dallas Turner for a long time has been the pick in mock drafts for the Falcons for a lot of reasons. They need a pass rusher. The betting odds suggested that Dallas Turner was going to be the guy, the first defensive player off the board. Those odds have moved over the last couple of weeks, and Leatu Latu is, it's not real rising, but from perspective from the media and analysts and fans, Latu's value is increasing, and as much as I think at the end of the day that I think honestly I would take Turner ahead of Latu. I have the Falcons drafting Latu, making him the first pass rusher off the board, the first defensive player off the board, and this is the pick that changes things for the Cardinals, because with Latu coming off the board, they can sniff Dallas Turner.
That would be ideal for the Cardinals too, right? If you can swing for the fences, a la what the Texans did last year. So that takes us to the Bears, and you mentioned earlier, kind of hinted at what you were going to do, and I don't want to call it chalk, but I think it's
betting-wise it is chalk.
Yeah, chalkier, in the hope that this is who's available for them, right?
Yeah. Yeah, you feel like Harris is going to be off the board. The Neighbors will be off the board, and it's weird because they've got DJ Moore, they've got Keenan Allen, but kind of like the idea of what the Cardinals are doing for Caleb Williams to come into what is basically a complete offense. He would be coming into a complete offense. They've got DeAndre Swift, they've got Cole Kmet at tight end, they've got DJ Moore, they've got Keenan Allen, and then you add Roma Dunze. That's a fantastic group of weapons for any rookie to go into, and so awesome, and it's a good fit. I think it's a perfect spot for him.
Yeah, and so I agree, and so I was just I've talked to a lot of people. One of the interesting scenarios that's kind of playing out is that that the Bears are in a weird situation, right? That they don't have very many picks this year. In fact, they're
definitely a team that could move back.
They only have 4 picks. One of the teams that actually has picks for the first time in their recent memory is the Los Angeles Rams. And I've heard from multiple people that the Rams would love to get up into the top 10 for either a tackle. So in a scenario where you're playing out your draft and a guy like Olu Fashanu's on the board, that would be a spot that they would look to jump up to throw their first this year, their second this year, which is 52, and then probably a late day 2, early day 3 pick next year to the Bears in exchange for 9. The other thing I've heard though is that they would love to add another weapon. And so I have them trading up for Brock Bowers at 9. They give up 19. They give up 52 this year, and then they'll give up a pick next year. And the Bears end up having then, 19 and 52 on top of some of their other picks. Because again, after the Bears pick at 9, this is one of the craziest things. They don't pick again until 75. And then their last pick is 122. So like, even if they were like, hey, give us 52 and 154 this year, or that, would they want something like that where now they've got, 6 draft picks instead of just 4? So it's an interesting way to look at it. But yeah, I have the Rams coming up and getting Bowers. And really all we did was flip-flop when these two guys go, because next up I have the New York Jets trying as best they can to give Aaron Rodgers as much as they can. It's ironic that we're talking about a young quarterback, Caleb Williams, an experienced but still young quarterback, Kyler Murray, and then a very old quarterback in Aaron Rodgers, and we're all talking about the same thing, right? We need to get them weapons.
Well, and you've got them going with a Dunze.
Right.
I've got them going with, again, chalk, Brock Bowers, but he's off the board for you. And I've heard a lot of analysts talk about this, is that the Jets kind of filled a lot of things. So they're okay at receiver. They filled their tackle needs, so they could go tackle, and the tackle would make sense because of the guys that Tyron Smith, he's old. They got Mike Williams, he's old and injury prone. But so, what they're going to want to do, especially having traded for Aaron Rodgers, they're going to win now scenario. And so whoever they get, they want to play. And I think there is no safer bet for rookie year production based on who's on the board for my draft than Brock Bowers. He can step in. I think they got Tyler Conklin, but, Brock Bowers and Tyler Conklin can coexist in that offense. And it gives them someone who can produce in year one, give Aaron Rodgers a weapon, and allow them to succeed, assuming they can do that, because they're counting on a lot of old, fragile players. And yeah, and so that's that. I think that's kind of the thought process for everyone projecting Bowers, is because they don't want to draft someone who's not going to play. So a tackle wouldn't make sense,
right?
And if Aduns is off the board, taking reaching for one of those receivers wouldn't necessarily work.
No, not at all.
And while you could add on the defense wasn't the problem. It was the offense last year. So give Rodgers a weapon in Bowers who can play, and you're looking good. Now, if they add Aduns, hey, well, that's great. I think Aaron Rodgers would be even happier with Aduns than Brock Bowers. But that takes us to the end of the top 10. So coming up next on the Rise of C-Red podcast, Best Our Cardinals talking about, we've got the next 10 picks. What do we have coming up next? That's coming up next on Rise of C-Red. We're back on the Rise of C-Red podcast, Best Our Cardinals talk on the web, as we move to the 11th pick, which both of us, it's a different team than originally had it, because the Vikings had the 11th pick. For you, the Atlanta Falcons have it, and for me, the Los Angeles Chargers have it. Who do you have the Falcons taking?
Yeah, I have the Falcons taking Latu. So same guy that you had them taking, just different timing.
Do you really think that the movement in the odds is legitimate, in the fact that they would go with the more polished guy than the Alabama athleticism?
It's interesting because I've said this all along. I like Latu. I think if you have if the Cardinals were to make a move back and have all 3 first round picks that we've talked about, 11, 23, 27, I would be more okay with Latu at 27, because I think you inherently have less risk with, a third lottery ticket than you do just the 2. But Latu in the top 15, and I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm saying I don't understand it. I just, it doesn't make a ton of sense to me. But if you're grading it just based on the tape, he's not that. I mean, there's not a ton of separation between him and Dallas Turner. So
right. He's so polished. He's really good. He's productive. But
right.
Yeah, and this is where I have the Chargers going with the position you had them going, but Alt is off the board, so I have the Chargers getting Olu Fashanu. So still kind of on the same wavelength, but this is where things go crazy, and this is where the Cardinals sniff. They smell a deal, and so we move on to number 12, and the Broncos. The Broncos, in my mind, would love to get J.J. McCarthy. They just don't have the ability to move up and do it, honestly. They don't, because they have no pick after 12 until number 76. And so they are willing to move back, and, they want a quarterback. I don't think they want to take a quarterback at 12. I think they'll do it if they have to, but this is where the Cardinals they have, like, Dallas Turner's on the board. We know how Monty Austinfoot reacted to Dallas Turner's combine. And so this is where the Cardinals get aggressive. I have the Cardinals moving all the way up to number 12. The Cardinals they give up 27, 35, and 104 in exchange for 12 and 76. And I'm happy with that. They take Dallas Turner, and they come away with they swing for the fences, and they get for my money, the best prospects at the two biggest positions that they had a need at.
Yeah, and to your point, you look at it and that trade, how that all goes out, they end up right in this scenario. You look at their draft capital, right? And we've talked a lot about it. And something that you and I have talked about, that you and I have written about, part of the reason we're okay with them going and making a trade up, because even like having 6 in the top 100 and 7 in the top 105, that's a lot of rookies, right? Like that's a lot of rookies in 1 year. And so, you lose 35 altogether, and you have them losing 90 as well, or 104. And so, it'll be interesting to see.
4 picks in the third round, and they can move around. Honestly, they
right.
can move around,
and they could potentially move back up into round 2 if they see a corner that falls that they like.
Yeah, someone at the end of round 2 that they like.
Yeah, and so I like that. I mean, it would be a great, fun scenario to play out, like you said, and to see that come about. I just have I'm boring and just have the Broncos sit pat and take Bo Nix.
I will say this, that this comes with a little bit of information, not a real report, but I have heard from people who have heard that the Cardinals are looking to move up for a pass rusher, and that their top 2 are Dallas Turner, then Jared Verse, then Latu. So if Latu goes off the board first, that puts the Cardinals in attack mode, whether it be for Turner to move all the way up or to move up a little higher. In fact, I think it was on my last of the mock draft that I did over the weekend, I had the Cardinals trading up to 20 with the Steelers, and they got Jared Verse. And so with that in mind, my last week, the feeling was they were going to move up for a corner. But if they have Turner or Verse within reach, I think they're going to be aggressive for that. And if Turner isn't taken at 8, I think things get like, I think that's when they start, that Monty turns on Super Monty guy, what he did last year. So we've got 12 off the board as we go to the Raiders, and we differ in the picks that we have them doing. You have them going with offensive line. I have them going corner. Why do you have them picking a lineman?
It's difficult because I've seen a lot of Michael Penix Jr. here. I just can't imagine 6 quarterbacks go in the first 13 picks.
It just doesn't feel right.
And then from there, you look at it, and there's a lot of choices, right? One of the ones I've heard a lot about, and I literally wrote it down and then changed it twice. I have seen a lot of people mock Byron Murphy the second here. And that would be incredibly fun.
Yeah, it would. I mean, you pair him, like, you've already got Christian Wilkins. You've already got Max Crosby.
Right.
And then you got Byron Murphy. That would be, for a defensive-minded guy in Antonio Pierce, you stack that side of the ball when your offense needs some work. But yeah.
So it ends up being, it's one of those things you look at. Again, you and I are not draft guys in the sense of everybody. We do a lot of work as much as we can to kind of have a sense on what teams are doing, but you have to go to these other sites and kind of know it. And the idea of Thayer Munford Jr. or Dalton Wagner being their starting right tackle next year, just it doesn't make sense to me. They need help at a number of positions, but I think addressing the offensive line and getting a guy in Taisi Fuaga, who, like I said, would be one of my picks with a bullet if the Cardinals had never even thought of Jonah Williams. So I go with that. It'll be interesting to see how this all plays out, but yeah, I have them going Fuaga over corner.
And I have them taking Quinyon Mitchell, becomes the first corner off the board, adding that to a secondary. Going from a pretty decent secondary to adding Quinyon Mitchell there, I think makes them a really good secondary.
Right, and I don't think that's a bad spot either. I think it makes a lot of sense. And it just starts to become putting the pieces together and how they all unfold. From there, we go to the New Orleans Saints, and we have virtually the same position.
Yes.
Virtually the same pronunciation and two different players.
You've got Troy Fautanu, Washington. I've got Taliese Fuaga, Oregon State. So both looking at the offensive line. They need offensive line.
I was going to say it seems like a foregone conclusion. The ironic thing is the most mocked person there's Olufashanu, which just it doesn't seem like that's plausible that he's still going to be there, right?
Right. I think his over-under on draft position was 13.5.
Yeah. So again, Raiders, Saints, like, so, it makes sense. But yeah, we're both in the same mindset. The Saints desperately need help along the offensive line. Ryan Ramczyk has a degenerative knee issue that could cause him to retire at any time. I think they just got rid of Andres Pete, local kid, Andres Pete. I'm double checking that, but
I think he signed somewhere else.
This team, Trevor Penning, James Hurst, Eric McCoy's not bad, Cesar Ruiz, and Ryan Ramczyk, like they desperately need help along the offensive line. So it makes sense. That takes us to the Colts.
The next three picks, we're all on board with the position, just not the player.
Right. And so I go Quinyon Mitchell here because he's not off the board yet.
And I go with Terrion Arnold, who is the next cornerback off the board. The Colts taking a cornerback makes a lot of sense with the division that they're in, being in the AFC. They got what was it? Julius Brents last year, was it?
Yep.
And so just give them another really good young cornerback for that defense, and I like it.
And this would be an area, the way that my board has fallen, that you could see the Cardinals looking to make a move, yes, like you said, for Turner or Verse at this point.
Yeah, and at number 16, we both have the Seahawks going with the pass rusher. You have them taking Dallas Turner, but the Cardinals moved up for him, and the Seahawks on my end get Jared Verse. The wild card here would be, do they go and get Michael Penix? I think kind of the idea, since Geno's their guy this year, why would you draft a quarterback in the first round? I don't know. Especially Michael Penix.
Yeah. The other thing you have to look at too is that there are a couple other fits there. One of them is Troy Fautanu, who's off the board in mine, but on the board in yours,
Yes.
and is another, local Washington guy.
Yes.
And then I have heard,
especially since you've got some worries about their right tackle with his injury.
right, and I have heard that one of the things that Mike McDonald would like to do this year is find a interior defensive lineman. And so I've heard a lot about Byron Murphy and Johnny Newton potentially at 16. So all of that information, it's a lot of information we just threw at you to tell you that we picked Dallas Turner and Jared Verse.
Right.
But all of these
because,
things,
well, think about this. When was the last time Seattle had a good edge pass rusher?
right.
It's been a long time.
I guess it would technically be Michael Bennett, but he's kind of a hybrid, right? Like he wasn't technically like an edge guy. So from there, we get to the Jacksonville Jaguars. And again, same position, just different names. Terry and Arnold is still on the board for me. So we go with Terry and Arnold, and you go with
Cooper DeJean. And so we're staying on board. That's a fun pick for both teams. The Bengals, interestingly enough, we both go different positions, but both are critical needs right now. They lost Jonah Williams to the Cardinals in free agency. They lost DJ Reader on the interior. So you have them going with Byron Murphy II. I have them going with Troy Fautanu.
Yeah, and that's how I kind of looked at it. It was a lot of, I looked at Murphy. I thought about a couple guys right after that, along the offensive line, along the, in the secondary, and it's just Murphy made the most sense in this position, and I sets up the Bears in my mock to get the guy that they, with Latu off the board, might have taken at 9, and you have the Rams going with the Aaron Donald replacement, right?
Exactly. So I mean, maybe it's a cop out. So Byron Murphy II, the probably most people think is the top defensive tackle, comes off in the draft. He comes off the board here, going to the Rams. He wasn't Aaron Donald in college, but if you watch him sometimes, he kind of looks like Aaron Donald. And so
yeah, and it's not a straight 1-for-1, like you said. It's unfair for anybody to expect it to be. But
if you squint on a few plays, you can see it. And honestly, there's no one who will ever just fill right in and be Aaron Donald, but they still need help on that interior defensive line, and Murphy is the guy to do it.
Yeah, and like I said, I had the Rams going up and getting Bowers at 9. There is murmurs right now, Jess, that Byron Murphy could be the first defensive player off the board. I know you had Latu, and so what would you think if we played out the same scenario and it was the Rams going up to get Murphy at 9, right? Like that. I think we both would get points for that. But yeah, so, and I have the Bears taking Jared Verse, who I've heard that, they literally could take Latu, Verse, or Turner at that 9th pick. Like, it'll be interesting to see how that goes, on Thursday.
And then with number 20, as we wrap up this segment of the show, Pittsburgh Steelers, also a team that seem to be guaranteed to take an offensive lineman. You have them going with the versatile guy in Graham Barton, tackle out of Duke, but projected maybe more of a guard in the pros. And I have them taking Alabama's J.C. Latham, jumps right at the right tackle. There you go. And they need to protect either Russell Wilson, Justin Fields, both. And so that it's kind of like they're going to do it. They're going to take a lineman.
Yeah, and it feels like they need to. I've heard that they love Barton as a center if that's where they go with it. So it'll be interesting.
And
but
they don't have a center right now because they cut Mason Cole. Believe it or not, Mason Cole was their starting center for the last 2 years. So
right.
Who knew? Coming up next on the Rise of Secret podcast, the best of our Cardinals talk on the web. Let's move on and talk about the final part of the draft, picks 21 through 32. That's coming next on Rise of Red. We're back on the Rise of Secret podcast, the best of our Cardinals talk on the web. At pick number 21 with the Miami Dolphins, we both have the same thing in mind, and I think it's kind of obvious why they would do it. They lost Christian Wilkins in free agency. You know, Byron Murphy's off the board. Why not get Johnny Newton? It's a perfect fit.
Yeah, it seems ideal. Less ideal if you're a Johnny Newton fan like I am and want him in Arizona, but it seems ideal for them. So that's what we both have them doing. Again, when it's this much chalk late in the draft, it just seems like it's never going to happen, right?
Right. And then we go to number 22, Philadelphia Eagles. You have them going offensive line, and I have them going with cornerback because they've got an aging defensive backfield. So I have them getting Nate Wiggins out of Clemson, a guy that I wouldn't mind. Seth convinced me based on what he described him, a guy that I think would be a great fit in Arizona. Seth talked about the reasons why in our last show. The athleticism, the on-ball production, the effort that he gives, and then, his willingness to tackle. That might be a downside, but, think like a feisty Dominic Rodgers-Cromartie, who actually played many years in Philly. He's the guy that we traded to the Eagles for Kevin Cobb. And what is your thought in taking J.C. Latham?
So I talked about this a little bit with Justin today. It's tough because you've got the Eagles who don't really, their needs aren't incredibly immediate, but one of the rocks of their team, one of the guys that has been, one of the best players in the NFL forever, Lane Johnson, is going to be 34 years old in May. You just wonder how much more time that guy has. Cam Jurgens is, starting at center. They have Landon Dickerson, Jordan Mailata. Tyler Steen, I could see Latham replacing at right guard, but this is a pick where you look at it and you say, we don't have an immediate need. You could talk me into an edge rusher like a Chop Robinson. You could talk me into a corner, but it would be kind of the same idea, right? With a corner. And so I don't think they have any glaring need a starter immediately needs. So I went with a guy in Latham who I don't particularly like, but I feel like if he's going to be successful anywhere, it's going to be in Philadelphia, and they're going to get the most out of him. And he could, and it's huge shoes to fill, but he could potentially replace Lane Johnson after this year.
Yeah, it sounds like the Cam Jurgens pick a couple of years ago. Now he gets to fill in for Jason Kelce. Good luck to him. That's not going to be easy to do.
Now, next up, we've got the Vikings back on the board, and you and I have them going defense this time, right?
Which makes sense because they need help on defense. Now, they lost Daniil Hunter. They added Jonathan Grenard. I have them going with the pass rusher and Chop Robinson. And I think, honestly, if Robinson's going to succeed, going to a team that already has a guy that can produce on his own like Grenard, I think that's a really good setup for him.
Yeah, I agree. I like that pick. And I'm just looking at what they have at corner. Obviously, Byron Murphy's there, Caleb Evans, Josh Metellus. Probably not ideal as your guys starting outside of Murph. And so I went with Nate Wiggins, as you talked about a little bit earlier, one pick earlier. Good fit, good player, makes a lot of sense, and a guy that we'll see how he translates to the NFL, because I think I have questions, but I love his ability.
At number 24, Cowboys offensive line's got to be the pick, but we have them taking different spots. You have them taking the the big, very good center in who can play some guard, Jackson Powers-Johnson, while I have them taking the big right tackle out of Georgia and Amarius Mims. Either pick makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And you look at it, and again, Mims, like I talked about with Latham, those are guys that I personally would not draft if I don't have the right infrastructure. Dallas has seemed to do a really good job with offensive linemen. Tyler Smith's been excellent, obviously. And Mims, like you said, would be a nice addition to a roster that needs it. I need the infrastructure. I don't know if Dallas has that. That would be my only concern with him there, but I could see the pick happening, just not saying I would do it if I was them.
Again, what we're doing is trying to predict as opposed to what we would do, which leads us to the Packers at number 25. Also, same idea, offensive line, different kind of philosophy. You have Mims going to Green Bay, and I have them going with Graham Barton, who you had going off the board to Pittsburgh. Barton, who honestly, there's the potential to play anywhere on that offensive line, and the Packers probably don't know what they need yet. And so his flexibility, I think, is a perfect fit. And if we're going with the traditional Packers philosophy of just drafting left tackles to play somewhere else, well, then you've got Graham Barton, right?
Yeah, and I agree with that. I like that, but he's off the board, and I went with Amarius Mims here because, again, infrastructure I think is going to be key for him. I do think Green Bay has the infrastructure to make sure he has success, but it'll be interesting to see how that goes. And that takes us to Tampa Bay and a lot of old friends from the Arizona Cardinals, right?
Yep. So you have them going with the Todd Bowles taking the edge guy and Chop Robinson. I have them going center. After Ryan Jensen retired last season, like, they need a center. And while, I'm not sure which one I like better, I'm hearing it from both sides. I know guys love Jackson Powers-Johnson better, while others love Zach Frazier. I have the Bucks taking the West Virginia, all-state wrestler, the center in Zach Frazier, who has just a little bit more edge. Daniel Jeremiah says JPJ is going to be like a top 5 center the second he starts as a rookie. But the other analysts I've listened to, Zach Frazier is not, it isn't necessarily behind him. Some have him ahead of JPJ.
Yeah, I like the pick. It'll be interesting to see how it all plays out and see where that fit is. But I like that pick. I have them going Chop because it's Todd Bowles, and
it's a Todd Bowles pick. That does work.
Yeah, he wants a pass rusher.
That's just not available for me. So
right, exactly. That brings in my mock the Cardinals back up, and your mock the Broncos up. Go ahead and give us your Broncos pick.
The Broncos were paid off for their patience. They get their quarterback. They get Bo Nix. I think if honestly, this is the right spot for Bo Nix. At number 27, where they're able to pick up a second and a fourth to be able to get Bo Nix right here is perfect. I don't know if they traded back that far, if they would have the patience to wait that long, but I still think it's right about right. But your pick is also your pick makes a lot of sense. I would not complain about it. That's a great fit.
It's one of those things, man. I have them going with Kool-Aid McKinstry, and I've really gone back and forth between Kool-Aid and Cooper DeJean at 27. DeJean's off the board in your draft, so it doesn't matter. But
the Cardinals were too, so.
Right, exactly. And I've just looked at this. I think I think if they had a pick between DeJean McKinstry and Chop Robinson, I honestly don't know where they would go. And so I'm just kind of throwing stuff at the wall here. McKinstry is a guy that he is just incredibly smooth as a cover man. He gives you a lot of options. He's physical against the run. And, a lot of times it seems like he's not working hard, but it's just because he's so good at what he does. I think, but honestly, if they took DeJean, I wouldn't be mad in the least. I think he's a guy that is almost bust proof in the sense that if he doesn't work out at corner, he can play safety and it's no big deal. But I think in the cover 3 heavy scheme that the Cardinals run, he is a guy that would be a godsend. But I took McKinstry in this one because he gives you a little more flexibility to run a little man stuff.
And he's also more of your traditional number 1 boundary corner.
Right, exactly. And so I go McKinstry here, and that brings up the Bills, and we have them going same position, different guy.
And obviously, they traded Stephon Diggs. Who is Josh Allen throwing the ball to, right? So they need a receiver. I go A.D. Mitchell, and as we've said in previous shows, he's the one that makes sense there. He's of the outside of the top 3, he's the one that you could put into an offense to be a number 1 receiver. He has the experience on the different routes. He's that alpha. You have them taking Brian Thomas, a guy that is intriguing but worries. He worries me. He worries me.
He worries me too, man. And I'm with you. If I was them, I'd take A.D. Mitchell or Ladd McConkey here, but I think that they're going to take Brian Thomas because I don't trust NFL teams to make good decisions.
And then Brian Thomas will be, get him in the right scenario. Especially I see DJ Chark. I don't know why I see DJ Chark, but I see DJ Chark, and I wouldn't mind the Cardinals signing DJ Chark, but not to be their alpha. No.
Right.
Number 29. The Lions, we both have different cornerbacks. You've got DeJean going there. I think Dan Campbell would love that. And I've got Kool-Aid going to the Lions. Both make sense. They, helping that secondary, giving Dan Campbell another weapon out there.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. If one of the interior guys was there, either of them, honestly, I think that they would be the pick. But
yeah.
Both of us have them off the board. You look at their corners, they just signed Carlton Davis, but the other one's Amik Robertson, who I like, but I wouldn't want starting. So yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense to go get a corner here. And then they have a really, really fun secondary, with Carlton Davis, Ife Melifonwu, Kirby Joseph, DeJean or Kool-Aid, whoever it is, and Brian Branch. That's a fun secondary to look at. I do think, like I said, I know they signed DJ Reader, but DJ Reader, Alan McNeil in the middle, I think they would love to have somebody that could bring some juice up the middle. Just, again, neither guy is available in our mocks, so we didn't do that. That takes us to the Ravens, and I think the Ravens are going to break the Chiefs' hearts at 30. But you have them going with a wide receiver. So I have them taking Kingsley Suamaitai, the guy that allegedly Andy Reid loves.
New guy. Why wouldn't he love him?
Yeah, right, exactly. And I love him. Again, another guy, like if he's there at 35 and the Cardinals aren't in on offensive line that early, he's a guy that can play guard or right tackle. I love that fit.
And I have the Ravens ultimate, like Brian Thomas is on the board. You know what? Brian Thomas to Baltimore, I really like, because guess what? They've already got Zay Flowers. They've already got Mark Andrews. He gives them it gives them big speed down the field, and imagine trying to cover Zay, cover Andrews underneath, and then trying to cover down the field with Thomas, and you've got Lamar Jackson who can run or just throw the ball over the top. So scary, scary stuff in Baltimore if they had Brian Thomas, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'm interested to see how that falls and what they do. That takes us to the 49ers. I think we both gave them Michael Penix Jr., right? Like,
of course. No. Though it varies. Like, you went with a pick that makes a lot of sense, and we've talked about it. When Mike McGlinchey left, they were left with Colton McKivitz, who hasn't been bad, but isn't. They don't think he's the future. They gave him, I think, was it a 1 year, $8 million deal to come back this year? They're looking to replace him. So,
yeah, they're looking to replace him. So I went with Tyler Guyton. I've heard, obviously the Roger Rosengarten thing's been getting a lot of steam. I just can't imagine that guy
Well,
goes in the first
here's the
round.
thing. Here's the thing that what I like about this pick is Kyle Shanahan doesn't love to rely on rookies, right? You don't want to have to play him. And Guyton, with the lack of experience that he has in college, you don't have to have. So they've already got Colton McKivitz. And so if Guyton outplays him, cool. If not, you redshirt him. You can redshirt him. There's nothing wrong with that. And they're in a position to be able to do that because they're a good team. I thought about that. Like, I think I had Guyton down to start. I think he was my first pick. And then I decided, you know what? The 49ers are going to break the mold a little bit. And they won't just go with the offensive line, but they did lose 2 defensive tackles this offseason. They lost Javon Kinlaw to free agency, and they let Eric Armstead go. And so I'm like, what could they do about that? And I saw Darius Robinson at Missouri, a guy that people are giving some buzz that could go as high as the top 20, or even people are saying. Like, depending on who you talk to, he's somewhere between 20 and 50. But
yeah, that's the craziest thing. And he's my ideal fit at he's my ideal fit at 35. Like, yeah. I think obviously if they go up and get, Turner or Verse, we're talking differently, but like if everything stays as pat, like if the script follows what I have here and they go wide receiver and corner in round 1, at 35, getting Darius Robinson, having a guy that fits as a base end that can fold inside on passing downs, that can give you a 75% snap rate as a rookie, and gives you a bunch of different options, that would be ideal.
And that's why I have him going to San Francisco, because what did Eric Armstead do? He gave them inside-outside versatility on the defensive line, and that's exactly what Robinson does. And so you kind of get the best of both worlds. Armstead, who really dealt with injuries this year. Robinson, who can play the same role next to Javon Hargrave. And, this feels like would be a really smart pick by them. The betting odds say overwhelming they're going to go offensive line. But that to me is like, that makes too much sense.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And I think offensive line or defensive line, but obviously depending on what they do with Ayuk is a lot of it, but it seems like that's what they're going to do. Let me ask you this. If an Ayuk deal doesn't get done on day 1, but they end up taking in either scenario, so guys that are available. So for me, A.D. Mitchell, you like an Xavier Worthy or a Lad McConkey, and they take one of those guys, that basically signals Ayuk gets moved on day 2, right?
That would be yes. And ultimately, I don't think Ayuk's going to get moved. Like, this has been he's using the same playbook that Deebo Samuel used, right?
Yeah, but the problem is that it's getting harder. It's getting harder to pay all these guys, and so we'll see how it plays out. Because I've heard from a lot of people that Ayuk is genuinely like disgruntled, like he's irritated that it's not done yet. So we'll see how it goes. That takes us to the final pick, and we have same position, different guys.
Mm-hmm. I have them going with the guy that I had to find a way to get him in the first round, because that 4.21 second 40, that basically locked him into the first round, in my opinion. Especially, so Xavier Worthy goes to the Chiefs, and they went from having a wide receiver core that you weren't really happy about, but now you get Rashee Rice back, stuff in Texas aside. They got Hollywood Brown, and now Xavier Worthy. Holy cow, the speed in that receiving core to go along. Never mind, you still got Travis Kelce. You still have Travis Kelce at tight end, and then 3 guys you just simply can't run with.
Yeah, it'll be fun to watch how that comes up and finishes things. I have them going A.D. Mitchell, who is very fast, just not quite that fast.
Yes, and Lad McConkey was almost my pick. I'm like, I can't keep Worthy out. Like, that speed, like this speed like that. Remember Henry Ruggs. There was no reason why Henry Ruggs should have been the first receiver taken when he was taken, but he was. Every with the exception of like J.J. Nelson, okay? J.J. Nelson, who is this return specialist at UAB. But anytime you get a big program receiver who's had productive years produce like that, he's going in the first round. So I just
exactly
makes sense.
So this is going to be a really interesting draft, Jess, because like I said, I think honestly after Williams, there's so many unknowns. The Daniels thing, him acting irritated with the whole situation, right? What the Patriots do at 3, I mean, like we said to start the show off, there's no way they take J.J. McCarthy at 3. And if that does happen, how do the offers change for the Cardinals at 4?
Oh my gosh. But yeah, if McCarthy goes off the board at number 3, well then I think all bets are off and the Cardinals get inundated with calls. And then that's where Monty's magic happens again, where they do trade down, trade up. Right?
Yeah.
Trade down, trade up, and they still like that. That's where they call up the Chargers and say, "Hey, if we trade back, would you want to trade back?" And then they can still get Harrison because I think it even still. I would understand if they didn't get Harrison. I think I'm just going to be upset. I'm going to be upset if they don't get Harrison because it makes too much sense.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. That's the big thing, like you said, because I think they would like to get him. I just don't know. I don't know what the plan is or if they're going to get a deal that they just genuinely can't pass up, right?
Yep. And then the rest of the draft for the Cardinals, obviously, I don't have them having a second-round pick, and so they're going to have 4 picks in the third round, so... And now, cornerback, you have more questions about. There are some guys that you can like, but I'm going with the understanding that perhaps they believe in some of the young guys they have on their roster, or they have their eyes on some guys that they think have some potential in round 3 to kind of go with that. Because they won't have a pick in the 4th. They'll have 4 in the 3rd, which means I'm betting if that were to happen, they would at least trade out like 90. They trade out a 90 back into the 4th round, and maybe take 2 of those thirds to get into the back of the 2nd.
Yeah, and that would be ideal, right? But, we got to see if there's somebody to dance with, and that'll be what's...
Always. And with that, we wrap up this edition of the Rise of C-Red podcast, our 10th mock draft of the first round. Some of them have been pretty good. We'll see how this one goes. We will not have a show the rest of this week because we are going to be inundated with draft content. Read our sites. Make sure you listen to Seth's episode with Sully on the original Draft Breakdown podcast. Otherwise, revengeofthebirds.com, cardswire.com. We'll have all the Cardinals coverage there. We'll be covering the draft all weekend, and we'll be back again next week. Again, thanks for listening as always.
Thanks for listening to the latest edition of the Rise Up C-Red podcast. Listen to previous episodes and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Audioboom, or many other podcast platforms so shows are delivered directly to your mobile device. Please give the show a 5-star rating and always support the sponsors who support the show. We'll be back soon for the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Rise Up Red Sea, be Red Sea Red, and of course, Rise Up C-Red.